So we're going to be talking a little bit about CHIPS, about the charity I work for, which is Christian International Peace Service, but mainly talking about kind of the things that underpin how we do our work, especially how we start out when we move into a new neighbourhood and how we kind of start looking at our new neighbourhood and what our neighbourhood looks like. So the other day I was sitting in a little community centre in our estate in Brixton, and I was just wanting to chat to the woman who ran it, but she was busy, so I was just kind of sitting, waiting to see what's happening in the middle of the afternoon. And suddenly in run, about 8 guys, young people, up to about, between 14 and 18, running in full speed. Some of them dive into the kitchen just to the right, some of them like break through the fire escape and shoot off over the street, the car park behind. I was just wondering what was going on, and in rush a load of policemen chasing them, and some of them dive in and follow them, grab them, the guys in the kitchen, and chase the guys over the car park, and a couple of them get caught in the middle of the little community centre. It's a very small little hall, about the size of this tent actually, and so the guys in the kitchen get pulled out, and they're all in the middle of this little space, and they all get pushed up against the walls and cuffed, and some of them are still in their school uniform, having just got back from school. It's quite a weird little situation going on, and I'm just sitting there thinking, well, okay, what's my role? I've never been in a police raid, especially when I'm not being raided. Like, I'm just kind of here watching. What do I do? So I started trying to work out what was happening, what was going on. I could hear the police saying that they wanted to search them, they wanted to find out what was going on. So I asked one of the police officers, like, what's happening? And they said there'd been a stabbing earlier in the day just on the edge of the estate, and then someone had reported a fight just outside the community centre, and so there'd been 3 riot vans turn up, which was pretty full on for like a load of teenagers, but yeah, 3 riot vans turn up and then came in and chased all these guys. So I'm going to continue that story in a little bit, but I'm going to talk about some other stuff first. So we're in the midst of that. That's kind of what's going on. This is our context there. The reason I tell that is because actually we're not often very aware of conflict in our neighbourhood, of what's going on, of the dynamics of relationships and power and violence that happen in our local communities. So when I sit in my little flat in Brixton, which I just moved into, do I even know what's going on next door, or in the rest of the block, or on the streets outside? When I walk down the street, and the people I walk past, who do they think I am when I've moved in there? What's their perception of me? What kind of prejudice do I have about them? What prejudice might they have about me? And if I try and talk to somebody or build a relationship there, what kind of dynamic already exists before we even meet? And even by moving into an estate in Brixton, especially at the moment, into a formal council house where there used to be council tenants just before we moved in, who lived there before, who in the community knew who they were, how might they feel about me moving into their house? It's especially this young middle-class white man in an area which is very much not like the whole gentrification process. And when we read the Bible, when we look at what Jesus did in his life, Jesus was really hyper aware of these kind of contexts all around him. We can see that he just understood and knew, and he didn't just do that because he was God and we say he was omnipotent. He did that because he grew up for 30 years before he started doing anything that we read about, and he grew up in the middle of that context, and he grew up learning about what was going on and what his family thought about people, what his neighbours thought about people, what was going on around him. He absorbed all that context and all that historical, cultural, relational context. And he decided to come into a place where he would learn that. He didn't decide to come in as king, as we know. He decided to come in as a learner and as someone humble who was able to develop that incredible sensitivity. And when in the way that we see people respond to him, we see that he clearly understood the power dynamics that were going on, whether that between the Jews and Israel and Rome, or the conflict between God and man and how people perceive different feelings there. And we see that he fundamentally was able to identify with different groups, and there are kind of 2 key ways that he did that. Obviously, his actual identity in who he was. He is a carpenter, a very kind of a person of the people, somebody who's just a worker, but he was also called a rabbi, so he was also able to identify with the religious leaders in his identity and by what he was called. He was from an outcast town really of Nazareth, the kind of edge, the marginal place of danger, but yet he was still part of the chosen people, part of Israel. And he was both man and he was both God. He was both sides of that conflict all in one, in his very identity. But then he also connected through his actions. He touched the untouchables and he hung out with fishermen. But he also hung out with tax collectors who were powerful, and he hung out with religious leaders and went and ate at the Pharisees' houses, as well as eating with the people who were his disciples, who didn't have, who were almost powerless in that context. He declared Roman soldiers and enemies of his tribe, like the Samaritans and others, to be faithful and worthy of God. So in his actions, he identified with all different groups as well. He saw the power plays of the religious leaders. He saw the victim complex of his own people, the people of Israel, particularly the people of Nazareth. He saw the exclusion of the Gentiles. He knew that process. He saw the oppression of the Roman Empire because he was there living in amongst that oppressed place. He saw all of those different dynamics, the power of the rich and how the sick were outcast. And so it was because of all of that understanding, because of that 30 years of developing all of that, that he was able to seek opportunities for transformation within that context. When he saw individuals who broke the norms of the relationships within those cultures, he sought out people who were willing, faithful, and willing to learn, willing to follow, and trustful. And particularly he sought out people who were prepared to cross boundaries, cross those normal dynamics and subvert those normal relationships. And those who were bold enough to cross those divides, who were willing and able to be changed and to subvert the situations around them, those are the people Jesus enabled to then be change makers in their own communities. We think of the woman at the well that he met, who was clearly an outcast from the time that she was at the well in the middle of the day with nobody else around, and engaged with this man who she shouldn't have engaged with, but yet he enabled her to then become someone who could engage and transform her own community. And he himself, as well as the people he worked with, he connected with those people through practical things, through practical ways of doing things, and then enabled them to find practical ways to minister to the people around them. And those two things, about crossing those divides, about crossing those relational situations, those power dynamics, and doing something practical to do that, those for Chips and for us, the charity I work for, are the real fundamentals of peacemaking. So why I'm saying this is because I think for us, as Christians and as people who are in places where we need to seek peace, and we have a call to seek peace, we need to really know our situation. I'm sure you're all Speak people, so you're pretty switched on. So everyone at Speak I see is super engaged. Mm-hmm. But I want to explore further about our own communities, particularly where we come from, where we live, what's going on in our situation. I want us to look a bit about what groups there are in our context, who's there, what the relationships in general look like between those different groups, and which groups have power, which groups don't have power. And once we can do that, we can start to then spot those individuals who don't fit in with those standard relationships, or places and opportunities for us to build bridges. It will also really help us to work out where we can engage positively rather than just being a bit overwhelmed by the situation or being apathetic, because we can map this, we're going to do it practically together. So just to tell you a bit about how Chips does that, when we're invited into communities, we spend a lot of time learning about the situation, but really when we move in, that's when stuff really starts. And the reason is not because when we move in we start doing stuff, but it's when we move in we become a part of the conflict. We become a part of the dynamic of broken relationships that are going on. Our founder, the guy who founded Chips, a guy called Roy Calvert-Cressy, he used to say, Chips takes sides, both sides. And it's not about being impartial. And the reason is, well, for one, we can never really be impartial or neutral. Like, we always have some sort of perception or preference to one group or the other, or even if we don't, then other people from both one or the other side will perceive that we do as well. So the perception will mean that we can't really be neutral in that context. And as I've just described, Jesus wasn't neutral. He was part of both sides. He was fully integrated with all these different opposing connecting groups, and he engaged with all those opposing and interconnected groups. So that means for us, when in Brixton, when we moved into Brixton, it's quite a challenge, because we were 3 middle-class white people moving into a formal council house on an estate which is largely Afro-Caribbean, like 80% Afro-Caribbean community, mostly council housing. We were definitely in a pretty tricky position, I'd say, when we moved in there. There was definitely no hope of us trying to be neutral in that context. We're instantly implicated in the oppression of gentrification, which the community are really feeling very strongly at the moment. And the long-term residents who've been there really feel very marginalised. At the moment, it's getting even worse and worse. And we were also seeing young people in our street, outside, seeing them when we were walking past them. They were hanging out, play fighting, they might have been dealing drugs sometimes, we could see stuff going on, or getting searched by the police, as I talked about. And we had to make decisions then about how we chose to engage or to not engage in each of those contexts with our neighbours, with the residents, with the young people. But the thing is, about whatever our response is, we're involved. You can't be impartial in your own neighbourhood. You are involved. You're implicated in some way. So, what do we do then once we move in? The first thing really is to listen and to learn and to build those relationships. One thing that actually Rachel and I just spoke about a moment ago, and I've been thinking about a lot recently, is how Jesus received a lot. He received hospitality a lot. We often think of the Last Supper and him breaking bread with people. We think of him washing his disciples' feet. But actually, probably every house he went to, he had his feet washed by the person who was there, and then received food from them and other things like that. Like, he received a lot of generosity. That's very challenging for us, because we like to be doing things and active and like serving, but to receive is an amazingly empowering thing for the other people in the community. So for us, we try and work out, how do we do that? How do we receive? What does that look like in our community? So when we try and build those relationships in our community, we try and do that from a place of vulnerability and try and learn. We try and ask questions, like just knock on your neighbour's door, where do I take the recycling? Do you know? What do I do with my rubbish? Like really simple things when you first get in there, just asking, because then it puts those people in a position of power because they have more knowledge. Whereas we might feel like we're the generation, I don't know what it is, Generation Y, are we? Yeah, the super adaptable, like all-knowing, we can do anything, that kind of generation. But actually, if we have to let go of that. We have to, if we're going to build relationships which are actually subverting the power dynamics in our area. And then also through the interactions we have to be super aware of what's going on and what other people are saying, and picking up and responding to what people are saying, and the implications those things have on what else is going on around us, because we can be informed just by how our neighbour talks about the person across the street or somebody on the next estate or something, about a power dynamic, a relational connection in that community between different communities. Cool, so now we're in there, we've spotted some of what's going on, the group's involved. What do we do then? So really we have to start making decisions, those decisions of whether we engage or don't engage in, and how we do those engagements in all different aspects of what we're doing. We might not even realise we're doing it a lot of the time, but actually a lot of times we kind of walk by and we choose to engage without even noticing. We choose not to engage, but that implicates us in those situations. So it's about being super aware, watching what's going on. When we see the kids hanging out on the corner, do we avoid them because we think they look a bit scary, or do we, I don't know, one day a month we go out with a football and just see if anyone wants to play football, or that's what one of our youth workers does who's around there, or just like ask what music they're listening to, just try and like ask a question, try and give them some role to play and connect their story with ours. So just thinking back to the story at the start that I talked about, we're back in this community centre. It's a good sized room, tent this, because it makes me really feel like I'm in that place. And we're in that community centre. There's lots of young people in handcuffs all around, lots of police looking pretty edgy, and me sitting in the corner trying to work out what on earth to do. And one of them was actually being searched just at the end of the table, just next to me. And so I was looking at him. He was in quite a smart school blazer. Seemed like a good kid, and especially from the way he was talking to his friends on the other side and saying, "Guys, chill out. It's all right. They're just trying to search us. Don't worry. You don't have to fight them." The other guys were getting pretty angry, but he was being really good, really positive. And so I said to him, "Just your attitude is really great. Just the way you're talking to your friends, that's really, really good." So I said to the police officer who was searching him, like, "Does this guy really need to be in cuffs? He's clearly complying with what you're doing. You don't need to handcuff him. Why don't you let him go, and I'm sure he'll be able to help you more, and you can answer your questions." And so we had this little conversation. We got to talk to the young person, got to talk to that guy, to the police officer. And after the police left, we had a chance, because and by that time one of my friends had arrived, to talk to these young guys who'd just been searched, and they were feeling pretty vulnerable and feeling pretty shaken up. One of them had damaged his eye when he got pushed up against the wall and things like that. But just got a chance to say, like, what's going on? What's happening outside? Have you been searched before? What's happening with the police? Why do you think they're doing that? And yeah, it was an amazing opportunity to be able to interact with these young people. And actually, when this happened, I'd been living on the estate for 2 months, and I'd been walking around, prayer walking around the estate with another youth worker, doing this kind of detached youth work. And I hadn't spoken to a single teenager. I'd spoken to some younger kids, like played some football with some younger kids, but teenagers were just like, these guys look like undercover police, so I'm not going to talk to them. So we met some youth workers, and they thought we were police as well. So it wasn't very good. It was I don't know what was going on, but yeah. So this opportunity, the kids could see I wasn't police because I was telling the police off. The police actually didn't give them tickets, which they should give them when they stop and search them. And they said, "Oh, because of the cuts, we don't have any tickets," which was not true. But yeah, so the kids were pretty annoyed, and we were saying to the police, "That's not right. Like legally, you've got to give them a ticket to say why they didn't stop and searched." And yeah, so the young people could see that we were on their side, that we were advocating for them. And it was suddenly this opportunity to get to chat to young people who were really on the fringes of some really difficult situations. And it only happened because I happened to be sitting there. I wasn't doing anything, I just happened to be sitting in this place at the right time. So that's kind of my little story. That's about what I'm going to say. What I want us to do now is I'm going to lead you through a little bit of a process of looking at your own neighbourhood and exploring practically what the conflict dynamics or the relational dynamics, because you might say there's no conflict in my neighbourhood. I understand that some, especially rural communities, it's very difficult to find conflict in your neighbourhood, but even understanding your relational dynamics is valuable for how you interact. So what we're going to do is we're going to initially write down who's around, get to know think about who's in a position of power and who's in a position of powerlessness, and we're going to look at the relationships between those guys. The reason we do that is because we place ourselves in that diagram once we've done it, and that's really important, working out where we fit, as I said earlier. Where there are situations of conflict or tense relationships, or misaligned power dynamics, people with much power and people with less power, it just helps us to articulate that, make that really visual, and we can say, okay, now how do we then engage? How do we empower? How do we be part of that process? Where do we build a relationship where there maybe not be a relationship at all in our own community? And we try and think, where do we see others subverting the standard relationships? Obviously, when we draw it, we have to draw the overarching relationship between these two groups. But on an individual level, there will be people who are crossing divides or building relationships which are not the overarching relationship, and those people are people who can be really transformative in those situations. So I'm going to do it for my context at first in front of you. Is that okay? Just so you guys see what it looks like in my area and you kind of see how it works, how the mapping works. I've got it on the back of an envelope, but I will do it on larger scale, that might be a bit easier. So this thing doesn't roll up too much. Great. What's going on? So, for you guys, the first thing might be to write down just who's in your area, because sometimes it's just important to think that through, especially if we've not thought this through that much. Just writing down. I'm just going to draw the circles straight away. A larger circle you draw for somebody who has a group that has more power, a smaller circle for a group that has less power. So I'm going to write new, young, my handwriting's awful by the way, professionals.
We know what you mean.
New young professionals. Now, new young professionals in Brixton have quite a lot of power. For a whole range of reasons. I'm not going to try and explain my diagram, but you know your own context. Another group I'm going to write are, let me write them here. Thanks, you can stand there. The council. They also have a lot of power. I might draw slightly bigger than the young professionals. Then I'm going to draw long-term local residents. Now, in my area, a long-term local resident is probably like, this is obviously, these are massive generalisations, but in my area, in my council ward, 69% of people live in council housing, and that is a majority of those people are long-term local residents, and they are fairly powerless in comparison to these other groups. Then there are, let's draw some young people. And I'll write particularly, I'm going to split young people into young people who are not in gangs. Obviously this is very difficult to define, but they are probably much less powerful than almost everybody else in this diagram. Then you have young people in gangs.
I did. Yeah, I did. I just woke up.
Probably about there. It's all very approximate, this. And then here we're going to draw the police. I'm not obviously drawing every group. I'm just doing a really simple map to make an example. Police. Police have so lots of power. Great. So we have a little map. We have already started looking at the power dynamics in our area, and now we start to think, how do those groups interrelate? So there's some relationships are really obvious, some relationships are not obvious. Long-term residents, I'm mainly meaning adults here, and then the young people are split into different groups. But these people are the parents of these people, if they're the young people in the local area. So these obviously have very strong relationships. So what I'll draw between them is an alliance relationship, which is a double line like that. And I'll draw another one here.
Would you say then that the relationship with the young people in the gangs, is that still strong? Still a strong.
A lot of young people.
They're not like out of the family loop.
No, most people still live at home.
Yeah.
They'll still live at home with their parents. Their parents may or may not know what's going on with them, but most of them.
Is it still quite a strong relationship?
It's still a strong relationship, and the parents do have potential for influence on young people, but there is definitely, and the parents will not like tell the police about something their kids are doing. That's fair. That wouldn't happen. So that's why I put them in an alliance. Really, they would side with their young people. The young people would side with their parents if there was any sort of. That's why I'm drawing an alliance. Then, what I'm going to draw next is the council and the police. Obviously, have an alliance. I'm just going to go around here. They work very closely together and support one another. those are fairly clear, obvious relationships. Now, the council and long-term residents. Now, the council own council housing, and the long-term residents might not be the same in every area, but in Brixton, council housing is pretty crap, and everyone's pretty angry about how the council treat them, how they do public services, all sorts of things. So it's a fairly conflictual relationship there, or at least tense. So we draw a little kind of lightning strike thing there. And then young people in gangs with the police. Obviously, that is a fairly, well, actually, we're going to have not even a conflictual relationship here, we're going to have a broken relationship. So there is no connection there, broken relationship, or there maybe could be connection, but it's definitely broken. Young people not in gangs with police is maybe not broken, but it's probably conflictual because of the history of Brixton and the relationship between the police and the whole community. It's very tense. We know about Brixton riots and things like that. So that probably means, and generally means, that the long-term residents and the police have a fairly bad relationship. So we'll draw a relationship there. Now, the new young professionals. Where do the new young professionals sit? Now, this can be questioned, but I would put them in what we call an informal alliance. An informal relationship we would do as a dotted line normally, but in many ways I think the new young professionals and the police, though they don't have regular contact necessarily, if they did have regular contact, they would support them. The young people wouldn't have any problem calling the police, and they would assume the police would be on their side if they did. So if we draw myself in that room, a kind of dotted line here, and then another one next to it. We've got an alliance, a kind of informal, irregular alliance there. This relationship is probably slightly more potential for conflict, but it's not inherently conflictual. So I wouldn't call it an alliance between the council, because young professionals still don't like the council a lot, isn't it? But just as different things. So I'll just put it as like an informal relationship. The other relationship I'm going to draw in is between young people not in gangs and young people in gangs, and that is generally what we just call a regular contact relationship. That means they're regular in contact, but it's not negative, and they're not necessarily an alliance. Cool. That is the start of our map. If you want to make it more complicated, which we could do a little bit of, we can start drawing in directions of influence as well between different groups. Sometimes that's very difficult to know how to do, but with young people in gangs towards young people not in gangs, there's generally a direction of influence like this. And actually, you can generally say it's from the more powerful group to the less powerful group, but the dynamics might work differently with different relationships in these things.
Can I just ask why the young people in gangs have more influence?
Because these group of people have money and power in ways. They have influence in the community. They have potential for violence in the community. People are quite scared of them. So though the young people not in gangs have made a choice to not be part of that group, it's very difficult to make that choice. So they're very threatened by that. So if actually somebody from this group wants them to do something, it's very hard to say no. So there is definitely strong influence that direction. You can also say there is influence from parents towards young people, whether or not that's strong or not. You could also say there's influence this direction towards parents from young people in gangs. I would say there's potentially also a reciprocal influence, maybe slightly smaller arrow. If you want to get really technical, different sizes of arrows might have different amounts of influence. The young people who are in gangs probably do have sway over their parents because they can say to their parents, this is what's happening, this is how things work, and sometimes they really run the household a bit more. Do we want any other arrows? So the council and young people I have not really drawn connection, I think I will draw a regular connection there with a direction of influence from the council, because the council have a lot more power than the young people. They are connecting through school and other things like that, and services that the young people plug into. This is probably a broken relationship as well. I think we'll stop there. I think you're getting the idea of how it works, I guess. I might turn it around so you guys can then see that. Now, before I ask you to do one of your own, do you have any questions about this?
Are there youth workers in the employed by council or that sort of area that have an influence over young people in gangs or young people in general?
Yeah, that's a good point. There are definitely more groups than I've drawn on here. I would, You can choose to make your map as detailed or as not, and you can break down these groups into lots more different groups. I've done this as a kind of, this is the basic. But yeah, there are definitely more. Yeah, there are definitely more groups, and that how they interact, this would be really valuable to draw. Any other questions? Do you guys feel like you could do this for your own area if I give you a pen and some paper? Some nods, some not sure. There's one shaking of the head. If you want, you can get into little groups. I was hoping there might be little groups of people from the same area, but there aren't. So you can